All right, afternoon. I said this was about public awareness, which it kind of is, but I misannounced. This is actually about the Unpersuadables, which is Patty sitting there. But I'll explain that term a little bit. Basically, this was, I'm just going to explain how what we did, why we did this, and where the word unpersuadables came from. In reality, PHMSA has technical assistance grants that they give out to nonprofits like us, and we got one last year based on me waking up at 2 in the morning and not being able to sleep and thinking, what would we like to do? What would really accomplish something? And one of the things was that we often hear nonprofit groups, local governments saying things about pipelines that just aren't very accurate. It's obviously they don't understand how pipelines are operated and maintained and regulated. And wouldn't it be nice to get some of those people up to speed so what they're saying in the newspapers can't get undermined so easily? We've also been asked for training. There's lots of groups dealing with pipelines all of a sudden that wanted to know more about how they are operated and maintained and regulated. You know, we sometimes see groups worrying about things that we don't particularly worry about because we know the industry's handling them pretty well. So let's get groups to focus on some of the real issues instead of perhaps imagined issues. We also would like to have allies. Every time PHMSA has a workshop or something that they call on the Pipeline Safety Trust to come and be the public. Well, I don't really represent 300 million Americans. And we don't, you know, our organization doesn't agree with every NGO around the country. So we're trying to kind of grow who the public is and get more allies in those discussions and include different voices. Just like the industry isn't all of one mind, either is the public. And we often see people talking past each other just because they don't understand terms. You know, there's lots of the word inspection in the regulations that you hear about. When the public thinks about an inspection, they might think about something totally different than what the regulator is talking about or what the industry is talking about. And finally, it was just kind of a grand experiment to find out what happens if you put a bunch of unpersuadables in a room and try to educate them and then let them discuss things with the industry and with the regulators. Does that change the conversation? I think I showed this slide earlier about the arms race, and this came out of, I was at a big conference up in Calgary a few weeks ago. And it was obvious when people were talking about public awareness and public engagement, they weren't talking about the same thing I was. I was talking about how do we get together and have a conversation about things so we all have better understanding. You know, the industry was talking about the 6 steps to victory to win your infrastructure, get your infrastructure project in the ground. And I often go to things from the Sierra Club and others that are, you know, standing up to big oil, and they have their own campaign to undermine the 6 steps to victory. And it's this arm race. Sierra Club does something, the industry does something bigger. NRDC does something, you know, some other industry group does something bigger, and we never kind of find a way to actually discuss the real issues, especially when it comes just to pipeline safety. So what we did is we did a national search, asked people, when I say public, I'm including tribal governments, local governments, NGOs, landowner groups, who wanted to go to Houston for a 3-day training using Byrd and RCP, a recognized, you know, that's what they do for a living. They train people within the industry. We got over 60 applications. These are the people that we chose. We ended up with almost 30 people, and that's kind of where they come from. It's kind of a diversity of different groups, a lot of NGOs, but some local government, tribal government, landowners. And those are the states they were from. And what month was this? April? I can't remember when we did it. May? We took all those people to Bill's office in downtown Houston. That's them in the training session. And he put them through kind of the same training he puts industry people through, as in how pipelines... Oh, nobody would have known that was you if you weren't. So we did the trainings during the day. And if you've ever been to RCP, Bill has a great model that actually operates. It shows you how a pipeline operates, and you can run different scenarios through it. And Bill managed to lose a pig. He lost the pig for us, and it was interesting. And then we all, you know, socialized in the evening, and some of us even did karaoke. And I think there'll be a run for that this evening. So anybody that wants to do karaoke, talk to Patty this evening. And one of the things we did, you know, it was the 27 or 30 of us public, along with Bill in the room, but we also included for dinner on the last night, we had a good inclusion, and I think the next slide, we brought in high-level regulators, industry folks. There's who joined us for the last day. Most of those folks joined us for dinner that on the Thursday evening, and then a good chunk of that last day was just having conversations about what they'd learned the earlier 2 days and what they really think public engagement, public awareness is with people that the public hardly ever really gets to have a conversation with. So that's what we did, and I just wanted to describe what we did and how we did it, and it was through a TAG grant from PHMSA, so thank you for that. We actually have got another TAG grant to do a second round of the same training. So if you know citizens or local government people that you think would be interested or you think needs to learn something, send their names along, because we're going to do another round of it probably. I haven't actually talked to Bill about this yet. Maybe we're going to do another round of it sometime in 2019. But what I wanted to do now is let Bill kind of talk a little bit about how he found training people. Oh, I never explained where the word unpersuadables was, because I don't want Patty to think I'm really picking on her. The fall, I think it was the fall before this, I was invited to I think it was an INGAA Foundation meeting in, somewhere in Texas, I'm sure. And I was there to talk about public awareness and public engagement, and got there, had lunch with everybody, and then they kind of threw us out of the room. I think Alan and they threw us out of the room because they were having a secret meeting, and when we got back into the room, it turned out they'd been talking about the campaign thing that I showed, that, oh, don't waste your time talking to the unpersuadables because you're just wasting your time. And there was stuff still sitting on the table that said unpersuadables on it, and so I just immediately started making jokes about, well, here I am, one of the unpersuadables, why you got me talking with you? And that's where the word unpersuadables went. I've heard it from both the industry and I've heard it from the environmental groups on the other side. Why do we bother talking with the industry? We're never going to persuade them of anything. So we brought the unpersuadables to Houston, and we'll see if Patty was persuaded at all. Bill, I wanted to hear what Bill had to say about trying to train the unpersuadables.
All right, thank you.
I don't know what you want to do with this.
You can just leave that up or go to there. There you go.
Yeah.
So hopefully this won't mess with anything. Okay, great. So thank you, Carl. And he gave a good introduction to some of the things that we did. Our company, just to clarify, we're an engineering consulting firm, but we end up doing a lot of training. Usually we're training people in the industry. So when Carl called me up and said, hey, we want to do this training course for people in the public that are maybe advocates, pipeline safety advocates, or even opponents, and I'm like, well, do I really want to do that audience? And I have to say, he never used the word unpersuadable when he was talking to me. So he never said, I want to bring 30 unpersuadable people into your office and you can see what you can teach them. So anyway, it's like we tried to approach this with an open mind. And it's like, well, it's an exercise in trust as much as anything else, so I'll give it a shot. And Carl said he would be sure to bring people that were really interested in learning the material. So took some training courses that I've done for the industry and kind of merged them together and brought them to a very high level. Number one, because we only had 3 days to do all this training, so you have to cover a lot of ground in a hurry. And number two, I wasn't talking to people in the industry, so we couldn't go into the same level of detail that we would for an industry course. But still he told me there were going to be a couple of reporters in the audience, and I'm like, this is great. I think the industry said, well, let Bill be the sacrificial lamb. So anyway, we set up some ground rules for the training to start with. Number one, it's not a FERC class. It's a pipeline safety class. So you got FERC issues. I realize that. I'm not here to talk about FERC at all. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to talk about individual projects. So you might be here because you hate company X's project that's hitting your backyard. We're not going to talk about individual projects. We're not going to talk about individual operators. We will talk about individual incidents that might involve an operator that, you know, had a major impact on the industries. We talked about that kind of thing, but we tried not to make it an individual issue kind of a training course. We're talking about, here's the industry, this is how it's regulated, this is what they do, and why they do it that way. No recording, and don't quote me after this is over. Okay, so I don't want to see a news article that says Bill Byrd said so-and-so. You know, so we're just here to learn and discuss. And lastly, I don't speak for the industry, because if I give you an opinion, that's a Bill Byrd opinion. It's not, you know, the liquid industry or the gas industry or something like that telling you what they think. So with that as the ground rules, we got started, and you know, we covered everything from design, construction, operations, maintenance, inspections, corrosion control, control systems, integrity management, you know, those kind of things. Like I said, couldn't get into a lot of detail. Everybody would have loved to discuss each one of those topics, I think, in more detail than we had a time to do. But I have to say, I've never taught any group of people that had more questions than this group of people. So every slide, 6 hands ago. I mean, you know it. You were there. You were in the back room. It's like every time a new slide comes up, you know, 6 hands. And by the time I got through answering those questions, there was more hands. And, you know, we're about 11 o'clock on the first day, and I'm like, hey, guys, you know, we're still on tab 1. And we really have to pick up the pace here. We're never going to get done with this material. I'm not trying to cut anybody off, but you know, clearly they were engaged, more engaged than any industry group I've ever taught. And I think that's a fair assessment. They really came to learn, understand. And the only person that never got any breaks was me, because as soon as I called a break, then people would come and talk to me individually. I'm like, I really have to go to the bathroom now. You know? So, you know, but that was good. It was exhausting. But, you know, we spent 2.5 days basically, or 2 solid days going over course material. And then Friday morning we had a panel discussion with Alan and several others that Carl mentioned. And then we had a Friday afternoon, went to Centerpoint Energy, was willing to host us and do a tour of their control center. Fortunately, they're like 3 blocks from my office downtown Houston, so that was very easy for us to go over there, and they made nice presentations about what they do and that kind of thing. So hopefully, you know, from my standpoint, I thought it went very well. I felt like the people that were there were what I would call honest brokers. They really wanted to learn. They had honest questions, and you know, they wanted me to explain, why does this work the way it does, or why do they do this, or why don't they do that, and you know, how does this work? You know, what is percent SMICE? How do you calculate? Why is that important? So we went over all those things, and I thought a pretty good level of detail. And one of the follow-up benefits of this, I think, is some of the relationships that were formed during the class. And you know, personally, I've had several follow-up questions after the class, people saying, hey, this just happened, what does that mean, or how did it work, and why did it do this, or whatever. And again, my ground rules for posting in safe pipelines, if you read safe pipelines, you'll see Bill posting from time to time. That's me, or there's another Bill, but usually it's me. And you know, I'm not going to answer questions about individual operators, individual incidents. You know, that's not what I'm there for. If you've got a conceptual question about how does this work in the industry, I'll be glad to try to help to explain it. So I took that same philosophy to the training course, and personally, I was very happy with how it turned out, and I'm willing to give it another shot if that's the way it works. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Well, I find Patty's slides, one of the actual unpersuadables, and I'm starting to not like that term very much, but I'm stuck with it. I just wanted to mention, you know, before we sent these people to Houston, we provided them a bunch of kind of basic information, so they didn't just go in totally unaware. So some of our handouts that you may have seen out on the table, the landowner's guide, and some of the briefing papers we do to try to get them up to speed on basic things. We also did a pre-test of some fairly easy questions like, which type of pipeline has the most mileage in the U.S., you know, gas transmission, hazardous liquid, gas distribution, and easy questions like that. I think there was 15 of them, and of that, on that pretest, people scored, I think about 48% correct. We sent it to some of the industry people, and they scored a little better. And Bill and I are still arguing about the answer to at least one question. The one he got wrong. But then we did a post-test afterwards, too, just to show whether Bill actually taught him anything. And the scores went up from 48% up to over, I think, 75, 76%. And some of the questions, some of the first 15 questions we asked really were material that we never had time to get to. So I think it showed that it worked pretty well. All right, Patty, here's your slides. And this is someone else's computer. That makes no sense to me. Let's see. There you go.
Go by, okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Patty Cronheim, and I'm here representing Rethink Energy New Jersey, which is an organization that I'm the outreach coordinator for. And I have to say, when I first saw the title for this panel, after Carl sent it around, I had to laugh because Unpersuadable, that's what we call many of the people in this room. So it was, okay, turnabout is fair play. So it's a guy have a sense of humor, and I have to say that if I learned anything in this training is what a patient person Bill is, because he really did put up with an awful lot of questions. So Rethink Energy New Jersey, we're an organization, and our mission is to help empower New Jersey citizens and inform elected officials and policy makers about how New Jersey can transition to renewables and step away from fossil fuels, hence the name, the Unpersuadables, I suppose, at this fair. So what makes us unique at Rethink is that we're very data-driven. So we do a lot of research. We use international gas energy analysts like Skipping Stone to do multiple studies looking at need. We've done job studies. Everything that we say, we like to be able to back up with data. And many of the things that we talk about were in early panels that were today, things on eminent domain, things on pipeline capacity, arm's length contracts. Those are the kinds of issues that we look at. Even though we come from organizations that were historically land trust and water preservation organizations, that's how we started, we saw pipelines as the new sprawl, and we also knew that there were a lot of unanswered questions. And if you're going to look at pipeline issues and those environmental issues in New Jersey, you have to start looking at energy as well. So that's why we were formed. We have done polling of New Jersey citizens for 4 years now, and we have seen consistently that New Jerseyans do want a clean energy future, and they're also concerned about pipelines and natural gas. We don't just fight fossil fuels. We also do a lot of research to look at how do we move to renewables. We did a long project called the Clean Energy Pathway for New Jersey, and that information was instrumental in helping inform the Clean Energy Bill, New Jersey's new Clean Energy Bill. That's our new Governor Murphy signing the Clean Energy Bill, and he specifically thanked NRDC, EDF, League of Conservation Voters, and Rethink Energy New Jersey as being instrumental in helping with that. And what we looked at very specifically is how to, the Global Warming Response Act in New Jersey, how do you cut emissions 50% by 2030? How do you get to 80% by 2050? So we did that kind of data. And that data has also been helping inform our new Energy Master Plan, which is a year-long process that's helping in New Jersey. So basically what we do is, one of the things that makes us unique is we look at a lot of claims that the industry makes for different pipelines or for the need for gas as opposed to different kinds of renewables, and we explore it. We see what's true, what's not true, what holds water, what doesn't. So how did I get involved? Carl asked that I sort of do a brief, how did I get involved? Well, I was the quintessential angry woman with a clipboard. Pipeline wanted to come through my backyard. I couldn't understand how a pipeline could go through preserved lands. So I started like in the bottom right there, I started just rallying people in my own community. And it got very out of hand very quickly. And a lot of people joined me. It went from a local group to then helping create Rethink Energy New Jersey, being able to talk to state elected officials, federal elected officials. That top picture is the our clean energy plan when we debuted that, and of course it all culminated with my experience with Bill and Carl in Houston with the Pipeline Safety Trust training. So why are we concerned about safety in New Jersey? Well, I work in communities. I'm an outreach coordinator, so I'm in communities a lot. We have researchers, we have people who do different tasks in my organization. I'm the person who's on the ground with the public, and they ask about two things predominantly. They ask about health, and they ask about safety. And New Jersey has 5 major interstate pipelines already, but we've got 7 new proposed major transmission lines in the state. We have 4 power plants, and within about a 50-mile radius of the center of that map, we have the equivalent of 5 newer proposed compressor stations. There already were 5, and that's a lot of new infrastructure. And so we have this combination of new infrastructure and a lot of older, aging infrastructure. And anyone who has done pipeline safety courses or reads Pipeline Safety Trust or Pipeline Safety Coalition information knows that when you look at the bathtub curve of pipeline incident, pipeline failure, it's those new pipelines, very new pipelines, the aging pipelines, or the bathtub curve of when they are more vulnerable to failure. And New Jerseyans want to know what's going on, what's under their feet. We are the most densely populated state in the country. We have over 1,200 people per square mile. So anywhere you go in New Jersey, you are going to be somewhat close to a pipeline. And in my community of the proposed pipeline, which is the Penn East pipeline, about 1 in 5 people would live in the projected impact radius, live or work in that radius. So we don't have a lot of open space. And when pipelines do go through open space, what they don't realize is we preserve this space for a reason. It's where our drinking water is. It's preserved. It's paid for with tax dollars. So that's important to us, too. We love our open space in New Jersey, and everyone voted for it recently on a ballot amendment to raise our taxes so that we could preserve it. So we do one of our polling. We can see that in New Jersey, we really do care. People are concerned about pipeline risks, and this is from our most recent poll. The majority of New Jerseyans really do have a higher rather than lower level of concern about pipelines. So that's why Rethink Energy New Jersey, when they found out about the Pipeline Safety Trust training, said, "Hey, Patty, go learn something. Go have some facts to back up what you're talking about. You pick this stuff up on the street practically. You have to learn things by going to PHMSA websites and going to the Pipeline Safety Trust websites and doing all the research yourself as much as you can." And so it was such an opportunity to be able to go and find out what's real, what's not, so we could be more factual. So what did we learn? Well, Bill went through some of this, a lot of regulations. They said Bill's a very patient man. Learn about oil versus gas, various agencies, how they interact, class location, state versus federal jurisdictions, and who runs what. So all of that information, Bill was very patient in explaining to us. There was also a lot of technical information that we learned, how pipelines are manufactured, the specific minimum yield strength, which I never know how to pronounce, if it's Smythes or Smiths or whatever. But, and don't ask me to do the math. There was math. I knew it then. I do not know it now, but there was math involved. And of course, Bill's favorite toy, the pipeline system, which only leaked once, I think, when you opened it up. And this is Bill doing, it was very hands-on, which was very helpful for many of us. This was Bill explaining cathodic protection using potatoes. So that was great. And of course, the most important thing that we learned was the difference between pigs. So that was very, very, very important. But I think one of the things that made this so unique or the ability to talk with people in the industry and talk with experts. I don't think anyone in that room really had ever had that opportunity before to be able to share ideas. And while we may not agree on everything, and we may never agree on everything, there was very civil and respectful conversation, and that is so important. We were not talking at each other. We really were talking with each other. And the other part of this that is so important is the ability to stay connected. As Bill mentioned, we've got a Google site. We can talk. I can reach out to Carl. I can reach out to Bill. If there's something I don't understand, I guarantee there will be things I don't understand. But we can stay true in how we talk about information because we are more connected now, I think, as a group to be able to reach out to the experts that we need to talk with. So what did I do with some of this information? Well, I've been out talking to the public for a long time now. So one of the things is you can talk about what are the basic questions. You can answer basic questions about safety now. So I'm able to answer them more accurately, as well as raise some questions that maybe groups aren't thinking about. One of the groups that actually is in the middle a lot, and Chuck Lesniak alluded to this, was our municipalities. Municipalities really are in the middle because while they may be fighting a project, they also have this other track where they need to be making sure that whatever happens is safe. They have an obligation to protect, their constituents, their community members. So they really are a sponge wanting to know as much as possible about what really is going on with, with pipelines in their area. So that's been very helpful. Another group are policymakers. So full disclosure, I am a New Jersey government official agent. I'm a lobbyist, which is a nice word for lobbyist. And there are three pieces that we've worked with, one of which I had started before I did the training, which is the Senate concurrent resolution. New Jersey requires all in-state pipelines to be built to Class 4 location standards. This is a resolution to the federal government requesting that all interstate pipelines are built, operated, and maintained to Class 4 because, as I said, we are the most densely populated state in the nation in New Jersey after the Edison disaster decided since 2009 that there is no place in New Jersey that shouldn't be built to the highest standards. The other piece on the left here is a PHMSA weighing in on the PHMSA docket, 2017-151, which is the class location docket I know a lot of you are aware of. And this is a letter from legislators, Senate and Assembly legislators who are involved in Environment and Energy Committees, as well as the Transportation Safety Committee, expressing their views on class location in New Jersey. And then lastly was testimony, being able to testify on safety for the ongoing energy master plan. The other piece is when something happens and the media calls. Now, if something happens and it's safety and they call my organization, like, Patty, go. I think this one I had to, Patty, meet him on the New Jersey Turnpike rest stop, which you can be amazed how much media happens in New Jersey Turnpike rest stops. It's very glamorous. So this was just being able to respond to that with as much accuracy as I could. And so a lot has been said about, in previous panels, about what perhaps needs to change. And how do you actually have engagement with the public, with policymakers, with stakeholders? And if engagement really is a priority, and you want to engage the public in a meaningful way, you have to be forthright with the truth. You have to be straight. You have to be real. You have to be transparent. These are all the positive ways I can think of saying it. And this is a picture of an open house for a proposed project. And actually, the story, I want to tell you a story. I don't want to lecture anyone. I'll just tell you a story. The woman in the foreground is actually someone who the story is about, coincidentally. I went to an open house, and it was a Williams company, and I went to an open house, and I was kind of on the down low. I was just in the background. This was a few years ago. And I was just observing. And I saw this one woman go from table to table to table to table, asking the same question. What's a blowdown? Because a big compressor station was part of the project. What's a blowdown? No one answered her. Not one person. They changed the subject. They talked about how clean the plant is. No one answered her. Finally, she's asking this one young man from the company, and she says the same question, what's a blowdown? And he doesn't really answer. And I get frustrated, and I just look at her, and I explain the best I can about how it's a venting of gas, how it can be a deliberate or an emergency situation, just as factual as I could. And she says, thank you. And the Williams guy looks at me and says, are you Patty? So my cover was blown immediately. And I have one more story just about how it would be better to be forthright up front so that people actually, you can build more trust. People will believe you. It's hard to believe people who keep you in the dark. So it was the very first time the Penny's Pipeline had come to my hometown of Hopewell Township in New Jersey 4 years ago, over 4 years ago. And they were all in a panel there in the front. There were over 300 people in the auditorium. And someone asked, what's your safety record? And the UGI, who I'm told is not here today, the UGI representative said, oh, we have a perfect safety record. And then the next person got up and held up a cell phone. It might have been me. And they said, how do you explain Allentown? 2011 accident, 5 people who died. And his answer, and I am not kidding you, said, oh, that was UGI Utilities. We're UGI Energy Services. And the groan could be heard. And no one ever believed anything this company ever had to say about safety again. That was it. They blew it. And they could have answered honestly, but they didn't. So these are pretty, I would like to say that these are unusual examples, but they're not. I have others. I won't bore you with them. But I think that if, there's an opportunity for us to have a real conversation, because these are truly important issues that people care about. They live near these pipelines. We live, we work. These are our homes. These are our businesses. This is our state in New Jersey. And we want to be able to have a real conversation. As I said, we might not always agree, and we might fight projects, but we also want to make sure that if they're built safely. So I want to thank Carl, Pipeline Safety Trust, and I want to thank Bill and PHMSA for the TAG grant, and Mark and all of the industry people who were willing to show up and listen to all of our questions and engage in conversations for this opportunity, because this opportunity helped me be more honest and more factual with the people that I work with, and hopefully we can make everything safer. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. I asked Alan and Mark both to come because they were there the last day for just the engagement portion of it, just to reflect a little bit about how they found it. It's interesting when you talk about public awareness and stuff. Public awareness was designed on how do you reach out to millions of people kind of all at once and as cheaply as possible and send out brochures and stuff, and I think that works to a grand degree in some ways. It doesn't work very well when you're talking about engagement in kind of the one-on-one conversations that Patty was describing. So I think we're all struggling to figure out how do we get to that kind of move past just awareness into engagement. And so I asked Alan and Mark, and Dave Merck's here from API. He was in the room too, along with some other of the trainees. We'll call them trainees now instead of unpersuadables. Just to reflect on whether, that half a day having that one-on-one conversation, how valuable that was. Because if you look at the pay scale of the people that were setting up there engaging with 27 people, does that meet the cost-benefit ratio of what engagement ought to be worth? So, Alan?
Sure. Do a tag team. By the way, I'm really Alan Mayberry. I'm not Skip Elliott right now. It's really me talking. But,
and I'm Mark Hereth. I'm not Alan Mayberry.
That's right. But we're a team right now, and we want to give you our perspective on being invited to this event on the last day, which I found extremely valuable. When I got the call from Carl to come join the panel on the last day, as I was breaking out into a bit of a sweat, I thought, well, doesn't my counterpart at FERC need to be there too, since we're dealing a lot with, siting issues? And he said, no, in this case, really, we're talking, the panel is really about safety and really informing the public and I'm sorry, I'll move closer to the mic. Yes, No, but to inform the unpersuadables about pipeline safety, and just, it's really a primer, if you will, on pipeline safety. So, I agreed to come, and I must say I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Right away, I learned on the committee, and his name is listed, or I think who he represents is on the list there, someone from Virginia, from Nelson County, and it just immediately brought me home to where I spend my time when I'm not in Washington, D.C. I'm always out, fishing in the trout streams in Bath County or Nelson County too. So it just kind of gave me a connection immediately to the committee there, and appreciative of the issues. I had a number of other thoughts, but let me turn it over to Mark. And
So I'll
let him
build on
chime
your
in.
comment about the presence of FERC. So one of the things that I took away very, very quickly from the questions that arose were that we can't box discussions in and say, we're only going to talk about FERC issues, or we're only going to talk about pipeline safety issues, because those of you that were in the room, if you had a question, it was a question that was on your mind, and if it related to FERC, you were going to ask it, and we were fine with that. But I think that was a learning I took away, is that the context that somebody has with their question is everything. And we can't try to box questions in and say, well, we're only going to talk about pipeline safety today. Your questions, the questions that the people had in the class, and they weren't students, they were great people, they asked the questions the way they had them on their mind based on what they had learned. And I thought that was a really, really key thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Just a couple of thoughts. I thought it was very appropriate that the group asked, what is the difference between engagement and, or what is it and what is it not? Public awareness really is telling people. Public engagement is asking people, and that's something I pulled from our discussion there. I also understood too, or appreciated the fact that the public does desire a voice, obviously, and that's the whole reason for the FERC scoping process. But they think earlier in the process, I kind of took away that they would like to be involved because they're local. They tend to know the issues, or can really probably help with making deciding decisions. Again, it's not necessarily a focus of my pipeline safety mission. However, there's a connection because I think as the public is informed and there's better communication, that really leads to better decisions. And that really is one of the reasons why we have this TAG program in the first place. Is just another tool in our toolbox. Like I've mentioned this morning, speaking for Skip, we don't just wear our black hats and write regulations and inspect and enforce. We also have other things that we do, and this was a very important aspect of our mission, to increase public awareness and engagement. I think coming away from this, and as we move forward, and I know coming into the new year, Pipeline Safety Trust has another grant to kind of build on the training that was done in 2017. We're looking also, as we see where we need to go related to public awareness engagement, possibly having, we're planning to have a public meeting in the coming months to kind of build on the theme of public engagement. So we're looking forward to doing that. I was hopeful we could do it in around the January timeframe, but it's still a moving target right now, but we're hoping to build upon that to see where we need to go related to, maybe some updated policymaking potentially.
And I'm going to build on your point of engagement. I think Patty made a really, really important point a few minutes ago, and that is we tend to hear a question and then answer it with the facts that are either convenient to us or frankly just candidly that we think the person is asking, right? And so I think what that time that we spent together that morning, which was a really nice chunk of time, is it enabled us to get a question, provide an answer, provide some different perspectives. Dave Merck might bring he'll add on something I might say or that Bill Byrd might say. But then if the answer didn't really hit on the question, it gave you guys the opportunity to say, well, this is really what I want to get at, right? And I think that was another really remarkable moment, is that when we were able to see that sometimes you have to take time to have these discussions. It's not a 5-minute discussion or a quick question and answer. It's really having the time. And that's what engagement is about. when we wrote that section in 1173, it wasn't about pushing information out. It was about really engaging in back and forth. In fact, somebody asked the question this morning, I think, about talking about risk. That's what engagement is. We should be talking about risk. We should be talking about what's done to manage frequency or likelihood, but also consequence, because if consequence is important, then we should be talking about it. But we've got to have the time to have those kinds of discussions.
Just a couple other thoughts too, and I meant to lead off with this. I just wanted to thank on our team, Christy Murray and Karen Lynch, who really, Christy as Director of Stakeholder Outreach and Engagement, she's in the other session right now, but she really leads the program, our TAG grant program, and then Karen Lynch was directly involved with working with the Pipeline Safety Trust on this. But a couple of takeaways in addition to what I mentioned before. For one, Christy and I spoke after the meeting, and we are increasing our involvement in scoping meetings. I know that was a takeaway I had from the group was, they really don't see us that much out there. Now, I know it can be hit or miss because there's a lot of projects, but we're going to be a bit more mindful, at least that was a takeaway, and look to be involved in more of the scoping meetings, especially on the ones that we see that are, emerging as controversial projects. But that was one of the takeaways. And there are a couple of others. An initiative we've had going, this Pipeline Emergency Response Initiative. We started that in the state of Georgia, and we've expanded it slowly. It was piloted in Georgia, and that's really related to working with the local responders, but that's an initiative that we're moving to expand in other states. If you're interested in more information on that, and that's specific more to first responders, feel free to reach out to Christy or Karen. And like I said, we're making plans for, public meeting related to this area too. And I guess I'd be remiss for mentioning, it hasn't been mentioned yet, but there's an API standard 1162 related to public awareness. As you may know, part of the regulation, the pipeline safety regulation, we incorporate by reference standards. And typically by law, it's like Plan A of rulemaking. Plan B is writing regulations to make up for any gaps that there might be. But we're looking and monitoring the progress of the 1162 committee to see where we may need to go next. But I know that committee's been working on that. I know that's been kind of an issue, especially between the public involvement in that group. We being the policy setter in that, you can be assured, regardless of whether you're an operator or the public, we're going to end up where we need to be. We're going to take the input of that committee. We're going to, through public outreach and engagement, of our own, through a public, setting, through a public meeting, that'll help inform where we may need to go in this area. So we look forward to that in the future.
So the final comment I probably have is that, and I didn't clear this with you yet, so I'm going to just go ahead and say it, is that at one point, after we had had a good bit of discussion, I looked at all of us collectively and said, would you all commit to continue to do this on a continuing basis, right? Because it did seem like it worked really well. And I think that was a challenge to all of us is, okay, this was an experiment. We tried it. You had great training on the front end. Is this something we should try to continue? And I think generally we came away with yes, with some pushing, right? That it probably is something we need to continue in one way or another. There's great value in it, at least we found there was. Questions or comments?
That's a perfect segue, because I'm going to talk about 1162 in
good.
the continuing effort in the other room at 3:15, along with Dave Merck. So nicely done, Mark, and we didn't even have to coach you on that. There are some other people. There's a bunch of trainees that are in the room, and Dave is here, who was there for the last day. If any of you want to say anything about how you found the training, whether it was worthwhile or not, feel free. We're glad to take questions too. I can say that we did, part of our TAG grant was not only to just do another round of training with Bill, and we probably won't do that last day engagement piece again, because we found out, I think one of the lessons learned is we really need all 3 days to get through the material with with as many hands as going up as we had. So I think one of the other takeaways is what we really were hoping to get in the room were thought leaders from NGOs and local government and stuff. And we did that to some degree. I see Patty using what she learned. I see Stephanie using what she learned. But there were some people in the room probably that weren't quite the right people, you know, big organization, and they were the lowest level person on the totem pole, and they don't even work for the organization anymore, instead of having the director of the organization come and learn. So we're going to try a little harder in some of those aspects. But anybody else that was in the room have anything to say? Yeah, Chuck was one of the trainees.
Yeah, I thought it was outstanding.
So let's get a mic on you since we're filming.
Chuck Lesniak. I thought the training was outstanding. I've been doing this from the municipal side for almost 20 years, and I learned a lot, even though it was all pretty high level. And one of the things, and sort of following up on what Alan and Carl were saying, is that I think that there would be a lot of value in creating an online version of this that is maybe funded by PHMSA, done by a third party that's not one of the pipeline associations, even if it's a firm like Bill's or something like that. Whereas a pipeline is being proposed for an area, or there's an incident or something like that, and maybe you distill it down even shorter, but a very similar kind of training that people that are concerned and worried and have those kind of questions could sit down and in an afternoon or a couple of afternoons do to get kind of basic information about pipeline operations and what they are, what a PIG is, and what a PIG launcher is, and what SMICE is, and those kind of basic things. And it could be done pretty easily as a modular online training. I think it would have a lot of value, and maybe something that was done through the trust, so that people see the trust as an honest broker as opposed to the agency or the industry.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff Inscombe, with the trust. I thought it. Yeah, I'm one of those, and also a trainee. I have a question for my friend Bill Byrd, but a comment first. I thought it was great, and I thought that from the point of view of the trust, it was one of the most successful outreach efforts that I think we've done, aside from the annual conference. And it's great to see some of the people that were there back here at the conference. So I think we established some relationships that I think are fruitful and valuable, and doing some good out in their communities. The question, though, for Bill is, it's striking to me, and in some ways like not surprising, that you've never had a class quite like this before, that the level of engagement from this group is much more animated and lively, and maybe even curious and interested than you get from industry people, which on the one hand is understandable. On the other hand, a little disturbing, right? Like the people who, right, that for whom this training is most important are those industry people who are they're there because they're being told to go there or something. But so the question is, did that training cause you to reflect upon that, and is it changing or altering, or like the way you might approach teaching this class to those industry people, as a way of, I don't know, getting them to recognize there are people out there in the public for whom this training that they're probably sitting through because they have been told to, is like really vital and important. Does that question make sense? Yeah.
Can you tell he's a professor?
And until that course, I just thought I was a boring trainer. So yeah. So now I know. Yeah. Well, I think that it's a good thing for the public and for the trust. I mean, the people that came virtually had to compete to get there. You didn't accept all the people that wanted to come. So yeah, that's a different audience selection process, if you will, than the normal industry courses that I send, and that's just the nature of the beast. And a lot of the courses that I teach, when I'm teaching people in the industry, they might know 70% of this material already, and it's the 30% they didn't know that they're going to get out of the course. So they're not just naturally engaged on a lot of that because I'm telling them stuff they already know. But this group, most everything I was telling them, with a few exceptions, was pretty new information. And there were a lot of questions that I would have never thought that anybody would ask. But after somebody asked it, it's like, oh, well, that's a good question. Yeah, I didn't think about explaining that. And, so yeah, it's a different, just a different, environment, if you will, with that class versus the normal ones that I do for industry. I do think there are some things that I'd like to change for that class next time. Maybe, because of the number of questions, dedicate some more time to some of the topics. This is a first attempt, so we were just basically guessing, Carl and myself, what do you think these people really want to know, and how much material should we have? And I was really concerned about that. And we could easily take the exact same notebook and spend all 3 days doing it, and we wouldn't be stretching anything out. We'd just have more time to discuss it. So I'm not discouraged about the industry people that come to my course. So I don't want that to be the interpretation. But I was very encouraged by the reaction. Like I said, I felt like people were really honest brokers that were there. They weren't asking me gotcha questions, which is what I thought I'd get a lot of, frankly, beforehand. It's like, they're going to ask me all these questions and they're going to try to make me say something stupid. And, they quickly learned that I'll say something stupid anyway, so you don't have to do that. I felt like when they asked a question, it's because they really had a legitimate question about it, and maybe they didn't understand, or maybe somebody had told them something different at one point in time, and they don't know why I said something in a different way. So, so it was a really good learning experience for me as well. Yeah.
I think Jenny had a question, and while the microphone's going to her, I'll just say that we also found out how cheap the public is to buy off, because with free M&Ms and Skittles, you pretty much can get them to do anything.
We have a good break room in my house.
I'll vouch for that. I found the training very valuable as a reporter. Jenny Mandel, E! News. I found it very valuable because in the course of reporting, I have a lot of questions and, ask them to the regulator and to industry and to other advocates in the space. It was great to have another person to throw questions at. So thank you, Bill. And it was also interesting from a reporting perspective, seeing the deplorables on each side. The unpersuadables on each side speaking with each other. So that was an interesting interaction.
The other reporter just wrote that down.
Alan, I wanted to follow up with your comment up there that you expect to be participating more in the scoping meetings. If you can what does that look like?
Well, from time to time, we are typically informed by FERC projects. I mean, much like many of you perhaps are on, there's your ability to get notices of projects that are out there. But what that really means is we are just looking to put additional resources on it. We have our community liaisons. We have 10 in the U.S. They do a variety of functions, from 811 activities, damage prevention awareness, working with the states on that, because that's a huge area, and it's actually, continues to be an important area of focus for us. But also, the role of the CL, the community liaison, came out of the Bellingham failure and the need to create better awareness among the public at that time in the aftermath of failure, because there wasn't the ability to really, the tools weren't there on the side of the federal regulator to really be in with the public and answer questions that were important to them related to pipeline safety. As that program's grown, though, we have, one aspect of what they do is attending these meetings and just answering. The focus really is answering pipeline safety questions that come up. The decision on whether to site the pipeline is FERC, or in the case of an intrastate pipeline, it's the state entity involved. Really, Jenny, what I mean by that is, the feedback I got from the group was, hey, we'd like to see more of you out there. So Christy and I spoke and said, hey, let's beef that up a bit. So it's really as simple as that.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I'm glad to hear that you're going to be beefing that up, because if I had one recommendation to make, it's that PHMSA is more engaged in the FERC process and certification of new pipelines. If we really want to have safety, they're involved from the get-go, because some of the siting issues, while they are under FERC's purview, to have a partnership with PHMSA, and that it would be so valuable to prevent other problems. I know that with LNG, you're now going to, FERC is saying you're going to be partnering in LNG process, correct? So I'm really glad to hear that, because when PHMSA shows up at a scoping meeting, they did one I went to in the beginning, the public did feel more assured, and we're glad that some of their safety questions were being heard. So that's wonderful that you're doing that. And please do more.
Thank you. So I wanted to share with everybody something about that training that I think is particularly important that we might not be thinking about. Someone this morning used the word demonizing, and I think we all do that with each other. And, you know, being on the side of being concerned about pipelines, I know that I feel a sense of tension that I'm not getting the information that I need, and that other person is feeling that I'm a threat. We both feel that way. And I think some of what that training did was, on both sides, humanize each other, which is a really hard thing to do. To have that, if you're talking to someone and it's directly about the pipeline that's impacting you, to be able to humanize each other is really hard. But I think what came out of that training is that there was some very frank conversation, and hopefully, I think on both sides, that takes things down a level, because we're constantly ramping it up. If you look in the news, there's all this information about how, the pipeline industry is really concerned about activists, and, we're so violent, and there's all of this research going on. And so that makes us nervous, that makes them nervous, and that doesn't benefit any of us. And so I think there was an element of that conversation leading to not just a better relationship, but the ability to take it down to a point where you actually can have that conversation at an adult, responsible, professional level, not having to come to the table in agreement, but to be able to have that conversation in a knowledgeable manner. And I know personally, that's been a huge benefit already for me just since that training in May.
Yeah, I wanted to actually build off of Stephanie as a deplorable and build on that. But no, just to build on that, going in, again, 30 NGOs, ENGOs, had no idea what we were going to, come into as far as the room and how the environment would be. And same thing, the discourse, having civil conversation at that level, hearing your perspectives, giving our perspectives, and being able to do that was incredibly helpful. But we need to continue to do that, and I like Chuck's idea. How do we do that? We talked about that at the end of the session, I think, is outside of a project that's being built where you have open houses and where things are a little bit more, heated and probably a little bit more testy. How do we have that conversation? This conference is the one conference a year that I know I'm going to come and get a good perspective, but what else do we have besides that? And I think we need to figure that out. How do we just have normal conversations, where we can just talk about safety and hear your perspectives? I mean, personally, I should probably go through a training course on some of the things that you're worried about and concerned with. So maybe I need some training, and maybe we need to establish some type of training on that. And so I think the important part of that was, and I'm glad you got the grant to continue to do this engagement, but that engagement needs to continue, and it needs to continue outside of the normal project construction space and just having those conversations. And I'll close with just saying, at lunch, we had lunch, and I was sitting next to, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, from Bold, Nebraska, and he said, the thing I got out of today is I'm sitting next to the pipeline manager for API, having lunch, and and we're having great conversation. So, that in itself is a win, and I agree. I think continuing to have a conversation in a civil way is what we need to continue to do.
What's your questions? Whoever has their hand up.
Keep going to questions. I'll make a really quick point building on what Dave said. and that is having these discussions in an environment where you're away from a specific project is really, really important. And I think that's the other benefit we had of that day. So we did in the INGAA Foundation, we did a tribal engagement workshop this year, and we had operators and we had tribal leaders and tribal representatives. And at one point they said we want to have some people wanted to have regulators, and actually we only ended up having the two parties. But because the engagement was not about a specific project or a specific set of tribal lands or specific issues, we could engage and have very open, candid conversation in a way that gets to be a lot more difficult because you're viewed as having a self-interest when it's on a particular project. So I think one of the things that was really great about that morning that we spent that time together was it was Sans project.
Well, the microphone's moving. I just might mention that, a few years ago, I think the title of the conference was Embrace the Conflict. That title for that conference came from Craig Pearson, the past president of Marathon Pipelines, because after one of these conferences, we were probably drinking beer, and he talked about how, he gets put into positions kind of like Dave said, or sitting with Bold, Nebraska and having lunch here, that he doesn't get put into other places. And he's learned that in that last day in Houston, it was very unplanned. I roped these guys up and said, I don't know what they're going to ask you, and I don't know what you're going to say. So it was like kind of embrace the chaos. But like Mark just said, there wasn't a specific project in mind, and it was a very open discussion and did dehumanize things a little bit, because it's pretty easy to jump to that.
Gina Green, Slate Energy Transfer Public Awareness. Question for Patty. I used to, once upon a time, coordinate open houses in New Jersey for Williams. So I was very surprised to hear your comment, because I know, I haven't worked for Williams in a number of years, but I know a lot of the outreach that they do, a lot of money that they spend, a lot of the 2 years in advance going and doing face-to-face meetings, not just the open houses, but with emergency responders and townships and whatnot. So I'm just kind of interested in the disconnect, that they wouldn't answer a question about a blowdown. Did you ask them point blank? I mean, why don't you want to answer that question? Because I'm curious about that. That's a question we would answer. I mean, I bet a lot of other pipeline companies in the room, I don't want to speak for them all, but that's just a basic piece of information that you would share. So I'm curious about the disconnect.
Good question. I was wondering the same thing. It
Well,
seemed like a
I
question
can't-
they would dodge.
I can't speak for why there was a disconnect. I can only tell you what I observe. A lot of the people behind the tables seemed very young. There certainly was money spent. There was no question about that. It was very slick. There were a lot of posters. There was a lot of the different stations on specific topics. But there were more than one misdirect. That was just one. That when someone would ask a question about emissions or leaking emissions, these questions were not answered directly, and that was not the only question that wasn't answered. So this is my experience with this one. I've also had experiences in public hearings where they come in front of the municipality, and there is, what was the word? Obfuscation? What was the word you used, Chuck, earlier? It was a really good word, began with the long word. Yeah, it was up too. So I can't answer as to why they make those choices, but that has been what I've observed, and all I can think is they're trying to, they're giving the answer to create, it seems to create the response and the reaction they want to get. So if they're going to say something that is perhaps going to upset someone, they're not saying it. I'm glad that you would, in your experience, that they would answer it directly. I couldn't for the life of me understand why they wouldn't either. But it was definitely, what these are called in communities are dog and pony shows. Because the industry comes across, if I'm going to be really honest, I've been encouraged to be honest, the industry tends to come across more like they're selling something than offering real information.
I thought we had all kinds of time in this panel, but we do have 5 minutes left.
I just wanted to note that I wasn't surprised at all by your story, Patty, because I have heard so many similar stories from other people. So many people who feel that pipeline operators in the oil and gas industry are not being honest with them, that these events are more about propaganda. And I'm trying to be honest here. I know there are people in the industry here. And so I would put forward the question, you mentioned that there are unpersuadables on both sides in a way, and it seemed like the training that you were doing was primarily aimed at persuading unpersuadables on one side of the issue. But given the number of stories we've heard even just today about these communication failures and public engagement failures when it comes to communicating safety information about pipelines, I would put forward the question, maybe trying to persuade the unpersuadables on the other side of the equation about the importance of trust and transparency might be a good and useful exercise if they were willing to participate.
Thank you. Come to the next session at 3:15 across the hall.
Hi, Lois Epstein. I'm on the board of the trust, but I live in Alaska. And I would never think that Alaska has that much to show the lower 48, but there are a couple of things that we do differently. We heard today that the tribes don't get visits. They always get visits in Alaska. I don't know if it's because there's such a strong federal presence. There's so much land there that's owned by the tribes. But you know, that's just one point I wanted to make. But I wanted a follow-up on the follow-up having to do with PHMSA being present potentially at FERC scoping meetings. I assume that's under the National Environmental Policy Act, right? Those kinds of scoping meetings? Is that what you're talking about? So sorry for the bureaucratic question I'm going to ask, but in Alaska, what often happens is many federal agencies become cooperating agencies and work with the lead. In this case, the lead would be FERC. Is that the kind of thing that would obviously be a bigger step than just listening to the concerns? But seems like that could be a good way of PHMSA to engage more, is to actually be part of the decision making.
Yeah, we have a MOU with FERC, and of course, notably, we recently entered into a new agreement with them related to LNG, but we already work, and it outlines how we work together. You know, it's interesting how the cooperating agency phrase is used. I know it was used on the Alaska gas pipeline, but honestly, we don't need that to work with FERC. Traditionally, they have notified us when they need our help at scoping meetings. In this case, we're really looking to push, you know, engage rather than wait to be asked, but actually to actually look for more of the projects that we need to engage in, you know, related. I think one gauge would be the level of controversy or input we may receive, but we already, you know, have or work closely with them. And regardless of what you call it, whether it's a cooperating agency, that doesn't restrict or really change how we engage in the process of attending meetings to answer questions related to pipeline safety. That probably has more to do with, say, if there's a special permit involved, like for Alaska, for instance, they were doing some other design methods. They involved a special permit from the federal regulation, but I don't know. Is that?
No, I was actually referring to non-pipeline situations where many agencies engage because then they have to sign off on the decision.
Right. Well, typically FERC will issue a certificate, though, that's conditioned upon the operator meeting the code, the federal code for pipeline safety. But
Buzz right here in the front had a question.
I have more of a comment than I do a question. I'm Buzz Fant with Kinder Morgan. I think you've done a great job in the Pipeline Safety Trust of giving us a chance, just as y'all gave them a chance to learn from pipeline about pipelines, giving us a chance to hear in the forums like we've had over the last 11 years, however many, to hear the other side of it, because I think that's made a difference for a lot of us in the way we do some of our programs. So just thank you to that.
And we always kind of wonder how far to push the envelope before you guys will run and hide.
Jillian Janetti, NRDC. Thank you very much for this conversation. And I think that one of the themes that you're hearing, not just in this session, but throughout, is that it's really important to have open, honest, and frank conversations. And, you know, to the point that I believe Jessica made, I encourage you, you know, on the FERC side to look at some of the comments that were written in the policy statement docket, because there are a lot of angry individuals on one side. But I also would caution, and I come from a unique perspective because even though I work at NRDC, I was a industry lawyer in big law for several years before that. There are some comments from industry that come off as extraordinarily condescending and belittling towards the feelings and concerns of individuals. And there is a disconnect and miscommunication on both. And I think that there are plenty of opportunities to collaborate. And I think one of the biggest things that would probably matter to people who are concerned about pipelines and pipeline safety is to hear industry support creating more mechanisms for the public to get that kind of information, whether it's through support for the Office of Public Participation that's been allocated for 40 years. I actually want to give Kinder Morgan some credit because one of the things that Kinder Morgan said in their comments was also talking about potentially loosening of some of the ex parte rules for tribal consultations, and that was something that you saw in several different types of industry comments. And I think that that builds a lot of legitimacy of seeing that there are areas where we can actually collaborate here. And if we heard more support for those things from industry, I think that there could be some real success here to help the divide.
Great, thanks. I was just going to mention, I often get tagged as the public, which kind of drives me nuts. And the industry gets tagged as the industry, and there's continuums throughout all of that. And I think it was Mayor Neugebauer from Green was mentioning how he's listened to some of the stories about how companies kind of abused landowners and stuff. And even though he comes from a city that was fighting with a pipeline company, he saw them once the pipeline started going in the ground being pretty responsive and not doing that type of stuff. So, there is a continuum of good players, bad players, and sometimes it changes from year to year or from whether it's a West Coast branch of an operator to an East Coast branch of an operator. So, and the same goes with the public. Any other questions?
I had one more, and I don't know how it fares as the last question with a little time, but the industry folks who've said this is valuable because it gives a chance to hear these perspectives. There's the FERC dockets. There are the open houses. There are protests. There are many places where individuals are returning to you the feedback that they're not happy with the process. So my question is, what is it about this process that works better than those other processes? Is it the fact that the feedback is rolled up from a civil society level into an organizational level where you feel like you are interacting with an organization? Is it the structure of being in a space that's moderated in some way? What is it that's special about this format that works better for returning that feedback than the formats that already exist?
Well, it's a point I mentioned a few minutes ago, is you take it away from the specifics of the project. So if we can get better at having these discussions in this way, engaged in this way, then maybe we can get better at having those conversations where people are frustrated at a project level. And the problem with dockets is their words. They don't have the context, the passion, and whatever behind them from both sides.
I just add, and I put the slide back up because I see these two different things in play here. There's all the public awareness and public engagement and all the good words we've heard today, and I think people are genuine and they want to do this. But at the same time, we have this war going on between big organizations that kind of undermines the ability to have these discussions. And I don't know how you deal with that, but clearly, you have the 6 steps to victory from API, and you have Sierra Club and others that are standing up to big oil. And how do you have that fight and at the same time move forward with some real engagement?
I just want to remind people who were at the training that there was a point in the training where it got a little heated when we were all in the room together and we had to say, okay, we are going to back away from talking about specific projects. So for honesty, there was that moment where it did get heated. Even in a moderated, safe room, we decided, okay, we're going to step away from talking about specific projects. Because as I said, there are going to be areas where we don't agree. But if we can talk about the background substance of those issues, then we can come together and talk, as you were saying.
We are out of time. We're missing our cupcakes or brownies or whatever's in the other room there. We're going to start at 3:15. I think in this room, R&D stuff, what the industry, a variety of industry R&D groups are doing. And across the hall is going to be a discussion about public awareness in the next phase of engagement.